Hello, everyone. Welcome to Broadband Deployment News. So here we go again with net neutrality. The FCC is set to reinstate net neutrality rules on April 25th. Will they remain in force? We'll see. Be right back with more. Hey there, Rick Husey with Broadband Deployment News. Thanks for joining me. So this came out today. This is a press release from the FCC. FCC to vote on restoring net neutrality. FCC Chairwoman Jessica Rosemorsel today announced the Commission will vote during its April open meeting to restore net neutrality, which would bring back a national standard for broadband reliability, security, and consumer protection. If adopted, the Chairwoman's proposal would ensure that broadband services are treated as an essential resource deserving of FCC oversight under Title II authority. So they're going to vote on it. They're going to, I think, tomorrow circulate the final draft report and order among the commissioners, and then they will vote on that in that April 25th open meeting. And with a 3-2 majority on the commission, the Democrats will certainly prevail. So this will go into effect at that time. I don't see how that would not happen. The question is, will it remain in force? Because there's a pending Supreme Court case, actually 2 cases, that are kind of key to this. They're not related from the standpoint of having anything to do with telecommunications. And I did a broadcast on that before, so I will reference that. I'm not going to go into all the details again, but I can point you to where you can get more information on that. But let's look real quickly first at this press release. So you see here, she says, if adopted, the proposal would return popular net neutrality protections. I've determined that how popular it is depends on where you are and your understanding of net neutrality. Most of the public, that when they hear, do you want net neutrality, they say, yeah. And most of us want net neutral internet because we're saying we want net neutrality. The question is, do you want net neutrality regulations? And maybe most of the public would say, yeah, I want to make sure that it stays net neutral. But what they don't understand is they think that they believe that net neutrality rules were in place, and when you took them away, everybody thought it was going to be the end of the world, and then nothing happened. And that's because the internet's really always been net neutral. Okay, the question was whether you needed rules or regulations to be able to protect that. There were some things that some issues that came up that were handled outside of net neutrality regulations, that were handled just through the regular course of the abilities that the FCC and the FTC had in place. So there was no change when net neutrality regulations went into place with the Obama administration, no change after they were taken away by the Trump administration. Now they're going to be put back in place again, and it may not make a change, although I don't know, this seems broader than last time and what they're saying they're going to do. And that's one of the problems, is that when you give an agency a lot of leeway like this, it gives them the ability to do lots of things that can really get into the business of a business. And that's one of the problems here. So you see here, so again, the popularity of this depends on what the public understands. I think most of the public thinks that without net neutrality rules in place, that they won't be able to surf and go where they want to go, and there'll be all kinds of problems, and that's just not been the case. It says here, provide oversight of broadband outages. The FCC will bolster its ability to require these companies to address internet outages. Without such authority, the FCC cannot require companies to report broadband outages, cannot collect outage data, and lacks the authority to even consider ways that it can help protect against and recover from internet service outages. So again, I'm not sure that's their role, but if it was, there should be legislation in the Congress that would cover some of these things that they're wanting to do here. It shouldn't be done under a Communications Act that originally passed in the 1930s, was amended. I think it was in the 1996. It was amended. And this was all prior to the broadband services that we have today. And at that time, broadband was separated from telecommunications, Title II communication services, as an other kind of service, not a Title II service. And what they're wanting to do here is reclassify broadband as a Title II service under the Telecommunications Act. And that gives the FCC a lot more authority over it. And that's why they're doing this. So then you see boost security of broadband networks, new and emerging digital threats that we're seeing. The FCC is unable to fully monitor and respond to such national security concerns. Again, it seems like these kinds of things should be addressed within legislation in Congress, and not something through classifying broadband as a Title II service, again, under this really old legislation that's out there now. Increase consumer protections. This would increase the tools the FCC has available to protect consumer data and respond to evolving consumer threats. Restore a widely accepted national standard. Again, widely accepted is debatable as to who you are. There's lots of industry folks that don't want this implemented, and there's others that do want this implemented. So it's got detractors and supporters. It says we need a national standard. 80% of Americans support open internet policies, and I would again say that probably more than 80% support open internet policies. I support open internet policies, but I don't support regulations to force that to happen, and certainly not, if not needed, I should say. If they were needed, that would be a different case. If we were seeing some kinds of issues, then those things should be addressed, not put this massive Title II regulations on telecommunications companies when we don't have a need to. They should go ahead and address anything that comes out when it comes out, and that could be done through Congress. Or they can look at these things that the FCC wants to have control over, and Congress can look at passing specific legislation that applies to broadband providers, not try to kind of shoehorn broadband providers into Title II, because that doesn't make any sense. And again, why this might be overturned is because there were two cases, and again, I did a video back when these cases were just going to be coming in front of the court, and they're two fish cases. So that's why the title here, How Fish Monitoring in the Supreme Court Could Scuttle FCC Net Neutrality Plans. And in there, I discussed that. I went through this article, which I also linked to. So both of these are linked to in the description of this video, and then also this article that I covered in that video. If you want to get more of a background, but kind of the high-level explanation of this is there's something called the Chevron Doctrine that was put in place back, I think it was in the 70s with the EPA. So this would cover any federal government agency, where it said government agencies are the ones that really kind of know what the particular legislation that involves them is about. So if there's a question, rather than it go to the courts, then the Chevron Doctrine gives some leniency to the agencies to go ahead and interpret the way they think it should be interpreted. And that's been kind of the way things have been handled for a lot of years. But the last few years, that's been less in favor. It's not been applied as much at the Supreme Court. And the reason is that people feel that it gives too much leeway or too much power to unelected bureaucrats at these agencies, that they can look at a piece of legislation like, for example, the Communications Act of, 36 and 96, I forget what 2 years are, but they can look at that old legislation and say, you know what, we think we should have net neutrality, so we're going to go ahead and apply these laws to this and have all that kinds of leeway. The Chevron Doctrine, like I say, that's very possibly going to be struck down by these two cases. And these two cases involved fishermen who were told they had to pay for inspectors on their boats. So there was legislation, I think it was, that said that certain fishing practices needed to be observed by particular government people, but there was nothing in that legislation about who would pay for that. So the agency said, I think it was the Commerce Department. Yeah, the Commerce Department said, okay, well, you fishermen, you have to pay for that. And the fishermen said, wait a minute, we're not going to pay for that. So that's what this was all about. And it's all related to the Chevron Doctrine, because that Chevron Doctrine was used to say, by the federal government to say, hey, you guys have to go ahead and pay for these fish monitors to monitor your fish catches, those kinds of things. So if the Supreme Court, now that they've heard the arguments on these fish cases, come back and say, you know what, Chevron Doctrine, this doesn't apply. Federal agencies, on major questions, that's the other thing, on a major question, federal agencies cannot make these decisions. We have to look at the legislation, and if it's a major question, and it's not covered in the legislation, then the courts would have to look at that, not the federal agency. And obviously, this is a major question with net neutrality. And obviously, it's not covered in the Telecommunications Act because, again, broadband service was not classified, specifically not classified as a Title II service within, I think it was the 96 Telecommunications Act. So because of that, it's specifically not classified that way. The FCC is coming around saying, hey, we're going to reclassify it as Title II. So it's not only is it it's not just that it's not covered, it's actually was explicitly said it's not a Title II service. So it's most likely if the Supreme Court strikes down these two cases as far as these fish monitoring and Chevron doctrine, and they address that then the FCC's net neutrality rules will not be able to move forward. So there's a question there. Now, when will that happen? The Supreme Court will generally get all of their decisions done before they go away for the summer break, and that is usually the end of June, early July, when they would do that. So they certainly could rule on this sooner, but it may be a lot of times they'll do a lot of these things, these last minute things, little things at the end of their term, right before they go away. So it could be as late as June or July. Now, the fact that the FCC has said, hey, we're going to go ahead and vote on this on April 25th, maybe they'll expedite that. Maybe the Supreme Court will come out and expedite whatever their ruling is going to be on that so that we don't have net neutrality regulations in place for a short period of time and then have them ripped out again. I don't know. But with the Republican, I shouldn't say Republicans, they're certainly not, it's not as partisan as, congressmen and senators, but, whoever, generally the administration, they go ahead and they nominate the Supreme Court person, and that person is a lot of times going to lean more on the conservative side or the liberal side. And on the conservative side, they tend to actually, look more at the Constitution and what it says, as opposed to trying to make their decisions based on current culture or policies, those kinds of things. They're looking at, at the Constitution and kind of a strict constructionist kind of view of that. Now, a lot of times that goes against Republicans. Sometimes Republicans want to do things that are really not that constitutional, and then they find out, oh, the Supreme Court ruled against us. Well, that's because the Supreme Court is looking at the Constitution as they should. But with the court leaning more conservative, it's very possible that they will strike down the Chevron doctrine. And I also linked to this article. If you want to check this out, this was done after the oral arguments. I won't go through it, but she goes through and talks about how it does look like it might be leaning where they will overturn the Chevron doctrine. So you see here, likely to discard Chevron. And if you really would like to listen to these arguments yourself, you can do that. I also link to this. This is a video where you can listen to the arguments. Over here on the side, you've got kind of some key points of interest that you may want to click on if you want to listen to what specific question was asked or what a specific judge said. For example, if something Kavanaugh said or Brown said, whoever, KJB, Kagan, Sotomayor, trying to think, Gorsuch was Brown, Jackson, Justice Jackson, Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett. So you can listen to how they responded, and maybe get an idea of how they might be leaning. So the question comes down to where will it land? And the FCC, again, their plan is to move forward April 25th in their open meeting. They will vote, and almost certainly it will be a 3-2 decision that reinstates net neutrality. And then what happens? So again, does the Supreme Court rule on this case that they heard back in January prior to that to kind of mitigate anything that might happen there or to stop that process? Or do they put that ruling out in the end of June or July, and then we've got kind of a few months there of limbo where the FCC is trying to implement this and internet service providers are figuring out what they have to do and all of that? Does the Supreme Court not do what people are thinking they may do, and do they not do something that would eliminate Chevron or only restrict it in certain ways that does not impact these net neutrality regulations? We don't know. I guess we'll have to wait till the Supreme Court comes out, but it'll be interesting to watch. I'm not going to bother talking about this on April 25th because I think we know what's going to happen. They will vote. So basically, this is just kind of, it'll get circulated around the FCC. The commissioners will look at it. They'll vote on the 25th. So if you were an internet service provider, you can kind of plan on that vote going that way. But again, what the Supreme Court does and when will be kind of a key factor there. Certainly what they do, but even when they do it, if they decide to do something, decide to make some announcement prior to April 25th to get ahead of this, don't know. Thanks for joining me. Appreciate it. If this was helpful, if you give me a like on the video, I'd like that. And if you're not subscribed to our channel, go ahead and click the subscribe button down there on YouTube. And if you click the bell, you'll be notified when I'm live. Thanks a lot. See you next time. Bye-bye.